Welcome back to Macomb Paranormal Investigations and Research. Tonight, we step into one of the most mysterious and unsettling locations in the Midwest. An island surrounded by water, yet seemingly surrounded by something else entirely. A place with a long history of beauty, tragedy, transformation, and unexplained encounters that continue to this day. This is the story of Belle Isle Park. But long before it was a park, long before it was a tourist destination, long before bridges connected it to the city of Detroit, it was known by a very different name, and it carried a very different energy. Hundreds of years before European contact, the Detroit River region was home to indigenous peoples of the Great Lakes. The Anishinaabe peoples, including the Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi nations, lived throughout this region in seasonal cycles, following the water, the fish, and the land's natural rhythms. The Detroit River itself was not just water. It was life. It was movement. It was connection between worlds. To these early inhabitants, islands like Belle Isle were not random landforms. They were spiritually significant spaces. Places where water surrounded land in a way that symbolically separated and connected the physical and spiritual realms. And in many oral traditions, the river was not silent. It spoke, not in words, but in presence, in warning, in memory. The island that would eventually become Belle Isle was used for fishing, gathering, and travel rest points. It was part of a larger living system that required respect and balance. And there are old stories, passed down through oral tradition, that speak of certain places along the river where travelers would avoid stopping after dark, not because of danger they could see, but because of what they could feel, that feeling of not being alone, even when no one else was there. By the 1600s, French explorers and fur traders entered the region, establishing trade routes and relationships with indigenous nations. As Detroit developed into a colonial outpost, the river became increasingly important for transportation and commerce. During this time, the island remained largely undeveloped, but it was not untouched. The surrounding river traffic increased, and the land began to shift in how it was used and perceived. And with that shift, something else began to change. By the 1700s and early 1800s, the region was undergoing rapid transformation. Settlement expanded, treaties were made and broken, and the natural balance of the land was increasingly altered. During this early settlement period, the island became commonly known as Hog Island. The name is widely believed to have come from practical colonial use. Early settlers often released livestock, especially pigs, onto the island to roam freely and forage without supervision. The island provided a contained natural environment where animals could survive with minimal care. But there's something interesting that comes up again and again in older river accounts. Hog Island was not just described as a place of livestock. It was described as a place of silence. Boaters and river workers would sometimes talk about passing near it at night and noticing something strange, not movement, not sound, but the absence of both. A kind of unnatural quiet that didn't match the environment around it. No official records confirm anything unusual from this time period, but this is often where folklore begins. In the absence of explanation, the mind fills the gap. By the mid-1800s, Detroit was expanding rapidly. Industry, shipping, and population growth were transforming the entire region. In 1879, the city of Detroit purchased the island with the intention of turning it into a public park. It was renamed Belle Isle, meaning beautiful island in French. What followed was one of the most ambitious park development projects in the United States at the time. The land was reshaped. Roads were carved through natural terrain. Bridges were constructed to connect it to the mainland. Buildings rose across the island, including a conservatory, a public aquarium, picnic grounds, boathouses, and landscaped gardens. On the surface, Belle Isle became a symbol of recreation, beauty, and civic pride. But as construction began, reports began to surface. At first, they were small things. Workers describing the feeling of being watched while alone, tools being found in different places than where they were left, and one of the earliest recurring reports. The sensation of someone standing just out of sight in the trees, not threatening, just present. By the early 1900s, as Belle Isle became fully developed and heavily visited, the stories became more defined. Maintenance workers reported hearing footsteps in empty buildings, doors opening and closing when no one was present, and voices, soft, distant, and unclear, coming from areas that were supposed to be empty. One of the more persistent reports came from early aquarium and conservatory staff who claimed that late at night, after closing, they would hear movement inside sealed sections of buildings. Not loud activity, just pacing. Slow, deliberate, as if something was still there after everyone else had left. Visitors also began reporting experiences. People walking alone near wooded paths described feeling sudden emotional shifts, anxiety, sadness, unease that would come and go without explanation. And then there is the pattern that continues into modern investigations: peripheral figures. Always just at the edge of vision. A shape between trees. A movement that stops the moment it is acknowledged, but returns the moment attention shifts away. By the mid to late 20th century, paranormal investigators began documenting the island more seriously. Equipment readings showed EMF spikes in areas without power sources, temperature drops localized to small sections of pathways, audio recordings capturing unexplained voices, sometimes sounding like names, sometimes like distant conversation just below comprehension. One of the most unsettling reports is what multiple independent investigators describe as forced relocation. Not being physically pushed, but experiencing a strong internal sense of needing to leave a specific area immediately. A compulsion, as if something on the island is influencing perception itself. There are also recurring sightings reported across decades. A female figure, often described as wearing white, seen near wooded areas or older structures. She appears briefly, often motionless, before disappearing without approach. Some witnesses describe her as appearing almost reflective, like she is not fully in the same layer of reality. And then there are the darker reports. Shadow figures, tall humanoid shapes seen near tree lines or abandoned structures, not moving like people move, but gliding, pausing, watching. Even today, visitors to Belle Isle Park continue to report unexplained experiences. Joggers describe footsteps behind them on empty trails. Photographers capture anomalies in images that were not visible at the time of taking the photo. Visitors report sudden temperature shifts and emotional changes in specific areas of the island. And perhaps most commonly, the feeling that the island is aware of where you are. Skeptics attribute these experiences to natural environmental factors: wind patterns, wildlife, light distortion through trees and water, and psychological suggestion in quiet environments. But others believe something else. That Belle Isle is not simply a place where history happened, but a place that holds it, layer upon layer, century upon century, of human presence, emotion, and change, and that something in that accumulation never fully left. From its earliest indigenous significance, to Hog Island, to its transformation into Belle Isle Park, and into its modern reputation as one of Detroit's most quietly active paranormal locations. This island continues to carry its history in a way that people can still feel: joy, loss, movement, silence, and something that does not appear on any map. One truth remains consistent across generations. People come here, they experience something, and they leave with a story they cannot fully explain. Because on this island in the middle of the Detroit River, something seems to linger. Watching, waiting, remembering. This has been Macomb Paranormal Investigations and Research.